It was the middle of the night at St. Augustine Medical Center, a sprawling hospital nestled in the heart of a bustling city. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting a sterile glow on the waiting room. A 12-year-old boy named Malik Johnson was carried in by his mother, Evelyn. His leg was broken, and every step he took was pure agony. The receptionist and a nearby doctor exchanged glances, smirking, their expressions suggesting they believed the boy was faking his injury for special treatment. What they didn't know was that someone in the waiting room was secretly filming the entire scene. Hours later, the video would explode online, igniting a firestorm of outrage. But for now, Malik's pain was palpable, and the tension in the air was thick. As they approached the reception desk, Evelyn's heart raced. She could feel the weight of judgment in the air, but she pushed it aside, focusing on her son. "Please, my son is hurt. He needs to be seen immediately," Evelyn said, her voice steady but laced with urgency. The receptionist barely looked up. "I need identification and proof of insurance," she replied flatly, her tone devoid of empathy. Evelyn reached into her bag, producing her driver's license and the family's insurance card. "Here," she said, sliding them across the counter. The receptionist examined them with a furrowed brow, but not out of concern. Instead, it was as if she were searching for something to fault. After a long pause, the receptionist shook her head lightly. "I'm afraid these aren't sufficient for intake tonight. There are certain conditions." Evelyn felt a surge of frustration. "These are sufficient. My son is in pain. He can barely stand. This is an emergency." Her voice rose, but she quickly tempered it, aware of the eyes around them. The receptionist's fingers tapped idly on the counter, her gaze dropping to the papers again as if stalling. Malik leaned against his mother, a muffled groan escaping him. Evelyn felt a wave of urgency rise in her chest. "Please, just tell me what it will take to get him seen." The receptionist hesitated, then pulled a laminated sheet from under the counter, turning it toward Evelyn. The number printed there was obscene, thousands more than any initial deposit should reasonably be. Evelyn's breath caught, but she did not let her face betray the shock. She understood what was happening. This was not about money, it was about making them hesitate, making them turn away. "Fine," she said, her voice clipped. "I'll pay it." For a moment, surprise flickered across the receptionist's face before she returned to her mask of polite detachment. Just as the pen hovered over the paper, a shadow fell across the counter. Evelyn turned slightly to see a man in a white coat approaching from the hallway. His stride was confident, but it lacked compassion. "What's this intake?" he asked the receptionist, his tone dismissive that Evelyn's heart sank. She recognized the man as Dr. Harris, the attending physician. He glanced briefly at Malik before addressing the receptionist again. "No, we're not taking them." The air in the lobby thickened at his words. "We're not taking them." It was a verdict delivered without hesitation, devoid of concern for the boy's condition. Malik's fingers tightened around Evelyn's arm, and she felt the muscles in her back stiffen, her pulse pounding in her ears. "My son is in pain," she said, her voice calm but edged with steel. "You will see him." Dr. Harris's lips twisted into a smirk that did not reach his eyes. "He's fine. Kids fake things all the time to get out of school. He's walking, isn't he? I don't see any emergency here." Malik's face flushed with humiliation and pain. The ache in his leg was no longer just physical, it was laced with the sting of being doubted. Evelyn felt that sting too, but it ignited a fire within her. "You think he's pretending?" she asked, her voice rising. "You think the swelling, the bruising, the fact that he can barely breathe when he puts weight on it is pretend?" Dr. Harris shrugged, as if the matter were beneath serious thought. "Maybe he bumped it earlier. Kids get dramatic." He let out a short, sharp laugh under his breath. Somewhere in the waiting area, a man in a navy windbreaker leaned forward, pulling out his phone. The quiet click of the camera app opening was almost lost beneath the growing tension. Evelyn noticed the motion out of the corner of her eye but kept her focus locked on Dr. Harris. "You will do your job," she said, her voice low now, each syllable deliberate. "Or you will answer for this." The receptionist shifted in her seat, glancing between them, clearly uncomfortable but unwilling to intervene. Dr. Harris looked almost amused by the attention. "Lady, I don't answer to threats," he said. "And I don't take orders from people who walk in here expecting special treatment." Behind Evelyn, a chair scraped softly against the floor as another patient, a young woman with a cast on her arm, angled her phone to capture the scene. A murmur rippled through the lobby, low at first, then growing into distinct phrases. "That's wrong. Why won't they help?" someone said. "The boy's in pain." The man in the windbreaker spoke up, his voice carrying just enough to reach the far corners of the room. "I've got this on video," he said, every word steady. His tone suggested he was no longer just a bystander. Evelyn's heart pounded harder, not from fear, but from the clarity that came when the truth was being witnessed. She knew what this was. She had felt it in smaller ways at restaurants, in stores, in glances that lingered too long. But here, in a place meant for care, it was naked and unashamed that Malik's head dipped slightly, his eyes fixed on the floor. The tension in his body told her he understood too. She slid her arm more firmly around him, her hand spread protectively across his back. "We're leaving," she said finally, her voice stripped of all pretense. "We'll find someone who still remembers what it means to take an oath." Dr. Harris stepped back, already turning toward the hallway. The receptionist looked down at her desk, the weight of the scene pressing her into her chair. Evelyn turned toward the door, guiding Malik's uneven steps with her own. Each stride felt heavier, the atmosphere in the lobby pressing against them. She kept her head high, though her throat tightened and her eyes burned. The murmurs followed them, some laced with sympathy, others with outrage. By the time they reached the glass doors, the rain outside had shifted into a steady curtain, blurring the glow of the street lamps. The cool air hit her face like a jolt, and she realized her hands were trembling, not from the chill, but from the effort of keeping herself composed. Malik leaned into her side, his body light in the way that comes when exhaustion begins to strip away resistance. They reached the car in silence, the rain drumming steadily on the roof as she helped him inside. For a long moment, she stood in the open doorway, her hands braced on the frame, the sound of her own breathing loud in her ears. Then she slid into the driver's seat and started the engine, the wipers sweeping arcs across the windshield. Unbeknownst to her, the man in the windbreaker was already tapping his screen, uploading the video to his social media feed. The caption was short and cutting. #Justice for Malik. By the time Evelyn's car pulled away from the curb, the video had begun its journey through the invisible veins of the internet, passing from one phone to another, gathering views, gathering voices. Inside the car, Evelyn's grip on the steering wheel was tight enough to blanch her knuckles. Her mind churned with a mix of fury and helplessness. The image of Dr. Harris's smirk replayed against the sound of Malik's sharp intake of breath each time the car hit a bump. She glanced at him in the passenger seat, his eyelids heavy, his jaw set against the pain, and felt the surge of resolve that comes when the insult is not just to you, but to someone you love beyond measure. The rain kept falling, unrelenting, as they drove away from the place that had chosen to close its doors. Somewhere behind them, in the cold light of that lobby, their absence was already being filled by the growing echo of what had happened, carried now by strangers who had seen enough to know it was wrong. By the time Evelyn guided the car through the rain-slick streets and pulled into their driveway, the video had already begun its rapid climb. It started quietly, one share here, a repost there, then gathered momentum as people tagged friends, typed furious captions, and attached words like unacceptable, inhumane, and this is America. In the dim glow of her kitchen, Evelyn stood with her hands braced on the counter, listening to the faint tick of the wall clock and the low hum of the refrigerator. Malik was upstairs, resting in bed with an ice pack strapped to his leg. Her phone vibrated against the granite, lighting up with messages from numbers she didn't recognize, notifications stacking faster than she could read them. Some were words of support, strangers writing about how they had seen the clip and felt compelled to reach out. Others were confessions, people sharing that they too had been turned away from St. Augustine Medical Center under questionable circumstances, their emergencies dismissed, their dignity stripped. The air around her felt charged, as if the house itself had picked up the static of the public's outrage. Outside, the rain had slowed to a drizzle, the street lamps painting wet streaks across the asphalt. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a call from an unknown number. She almost ignored it, but something in her made her swipe to answer. Mrs. Johnson, the voice was warm, professional, with a firmness that suggested courtroom confidence. My name is Robert Clean. I'm an attorney with the Civil Rights Legal Alliance. I saw the video. My team and I would like to represent you and your son pro bono. We believe what happened tonight is part of a larger pattern, and we intend to hold the hospital accountable. Evelyn pressed the phone tighter to her ear, her fingers curling around the edge of the counter. I'm not sure what to say, she admitted, the words coming out softer than she expected. Say yes, Clean replied without hesitation. You have the truth on your side. And now the world is watching. We'll be in touch first thing in the morning. The call ended as abruptly as it began, leaving her staring at the darkened screen, her mind struggling to keep pace with the sudden turn. Elsewhere, in a downtown high-rise wrapped in floor-to-ceiling glass, a meeting had just concluded in a room where the air still smelled faintly of expensive coffee and polished wood. The men and women around the table were gathering their files, murmuring about next week's agenda. But one man remained seated, his posture still as stone. Colonel David Johnson had been reviewing briefing notes when his aide placed a tablet in front of him. The video paused at the first frame. His wife in the hospital lobby, one arm around their son, facing down a man in a white coat. He tapped the screen, and the footage began to play. With each second, his face hardened. He watched Evelyn's steady defiance, the boy's clenched jaw, the doctor's dismissive smirk. His hands, broad and steady from years of command, curled slightly on the tabletop. By the time the clip ended, the faint murmur of the room had faded from his awareness. All he could hear was the rain against the glass and the pulse of blood in his ears. He set the tablet down with measured care, the gesture belying the storm building inside him. His gaze fixed on some invisible point beyond the room, the look of a man already moving through the steps of a plan. Without a word, he pushed back from the table. The scrape of the chair against the polished floor was sharp in the quiet. Every head in the room turned toward him, but he didn't meet their eyes. Crossing to the coat rack, he shrugged into his tailored overcoat, the dark wool falling into place over his uniform with military precision. His phone was already in his hand as he strode toward the door. His voice was low but edged with steel when his aide answered. "Prepare the car," he said. "We're going to the hospital." He ended the call without waiting for acknowledgement, his pace unbroken as he stepped into the corridor. Outside the glass walls, the city lights glimmered against the wet streets, reflections shimmering like signals in the dark. In his mind, the hospital was no longer just a place where his son had been denied care. It was a place where his family had been disrespected, their worth measured and dismissed in front of strangers. That was something Colonel David Johnson could not and would not allow to stand. The rain had stopped by the time the convoy of black vehicles turned into the circular driveway of St. Augustine Medical Center, but the pavement still glistened under the amber glow of the street lamps. Engines idled low, their sound steady and deliberate, like a warning that no one inside could ignore. The first SUV door opened, and Colonel David Johnson stepped out, his overcoat catching the faint breeze, his polished shoes striking the wet ground with a measured rhythm. His face was carved from stone, the kind of expression that did not invite questions or hesitation. Two aides fell in behind him without a word, their presence an extension of his will. The automatic doors slid open as he entered, the sterile lobby lights throwing a pale sheen across the polished floor. The few patients and visitors scattered in the seating area looked up from their phones, conversations faltering as they took in the man who had just crossed the threshold. There was a weight in the air now, the quiet tension that precedes something irrevocable. Colonel Johnson's gaze swept the lobby once before settling on the reception desk. The same woman from the video sat there, her fingers frozen above the keyboard, color draining from her face. "Call the attending physician who turned my son away," he said, his voice calm but unyielding, each syllable landing like a gavel strike. "And you will stand here as well." There was no trace of anger in his tone, yet it carried the certainty of command, the unspoken understanding that this was not a request and not to be delayed. The receptionist fumbled for the phone, her hands trembling slightly as she paged the doctor. Within minutes, the man in the white coat appeared from the hallway, his confident stride from earlier now reduced to something more cautious. His eyes darted briefly to the colonel, then to the small gathering of onlookers whose attention had sharpened into silence. Colonel Johnson took one step forward, his presence filling the space between them. "You have committed an offense tonight," he said, his voice still even, but with an edge that cut clean through the air. "An offense that will stain your name for the rest of your life. No matter how you try to wash it away, you denied a child in pain the care he needed. You disrespected his mother. You disgraced the profession you swore to uphold." The doctor opened his mouth, perhaps to defend himself. But the colonel's raised hand stopped him cold. From the inside pocket of his coat, Johnson withdrew a small leather case and flipped it open just enough to show the insignia within. "As of this moment, you are suspended from your duties pending investigation," he continued, turning his gaze briefly toward the receptionist. "The same applies to you." His aide stepped forward with a document already prepared. The sound of the pen scratching across paper punctuated the order. Two uniformed officers entered through the main doors, their presence a final seal on the colonel's words. Without resistance, the doctor and receptionist were escorted toward the exit, the whisper of fabric and the soft jingle of keys the only sounds as they passed through the gathering crowd. Murmurs swelled in their wake, tones of disbelief, approval, and something close to a "WIPY then." The press had begun to arrive, drawn by the siren call of a story already burning through the internet. Camera flashes cut through the lobby's pale light, capturing the colonel's still form, the firm set of his jaw, and the shadow of Evelyn's figure as she appeared from the side entrance with Malik in her arms. The boy's face was pale but alert, his eyes tracking the scene with a mixture of confusion and relief. Questions were shouted, microphones extended, but Colonel Johnson ignored them, placing a steady hand on his wife's shoulder. "We're going," he said quietly, and she understood. The cameras caught the moment anyway, the two of them turning together, their son held between them, walking past the lenses with the unspoken dignity of people who knew this was not their first battle and would not be their last. Outside, another vehicle from the convoy waited, its back door already open. Malik was settled gently into the seat, a blanket tucked over him, his legs supported by cushions. Evelyn slid in beside him, her hand finding his. The colonel took the front passenger seat, giving a brief nod to the driver. "To Mercy General," he ordered. "They'll be expecting us." The ride was quiet. The only sounds were the hum of the engine and the muted swish of tires on damp asphalt. Malik leaned against his mother's side, his eyelids heavy, the pain dulled by the certainty that this night's ordeal was ending. Evelyn looked across at her husband, their eyes meeting in the reflection of the glass. There was no need for words. Both of them carried the shared knowledge of what it meant to live in a world where their worth could be questioned so easily, and how quickly they had learned to fight for at Mercy General. A team of doctors was waiting at the entrance, the doors flung wide in welcome rather than hesitation. Malik was taken inside immediately, the medical staff moving with quiet efficiency, every action purposeful. Evelyn and David stood just outside the treatment room, the fluorescent lights spilling into the hallway. For the first time that night, the colonel allowed his shoulders to ease, the rigid line of his posture softening as he turned toward his wife. She stepped into his arms, and for a long moment, they simply stood there, the noise of the hospital fading into the background. The embrace was not one of celebration but of recognition and acknowledgement of a familiar cycle of nights like this where the fight was won but the cost still lingered in the blood. When they finally stepped back, their hands remained linked. The quiet understanding between them said everything that needed to be said. Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.